So in our study of Bible prophecy, as Brother Jackson points out, we're dealing specifically right now with Cyrus. And so keep in mind, as we are looking at this, we're constantly trying to see things from a panoramic point of view, looking at how God is working to bring about his plan of redemption. And so in looking at this, we are looking specifically at about specific prophecies relative to one particular instance in Old Testament history. So I'm going to speed through things that we've already covered, because there's some things we don't need to cover again. As we talked about last week, get past all. I need to keep this around because every once in a while somebody asks a question. Okay, getting close to where I want to be. All right. So, yeah, it's good. So we noted last week that God was going to provide them release from their 70 years of captivity. He was going to allow them to go back into the promised land, go back into the land that he had given them. And we discussed and pointed out that he was going to use whom to do this? Cyrus. That's right. Cyrus is going to be the person we pointed out last week. Cyrus, as we ended, 23 times in the Old Testament does God mention specifically Cyrus, this particular Cyrus. This is by way of review in Ezra, the book of Ezra, the edict that God had issued. It's recorded for us in the book of Ezra. This is the written document where he is given instructions to go back to the land, and not only instructions to go back into the land, but he commands the governors throughout his empire to allow Ezra to allow these men to go back. Don't give them any trouble. And not only that, but the gold that they're taking, all of those things. Ezra records that, and so we looked at all of that. And in essence, Brother Jackson said, Cyrus gave them license to go back to the land. And we ended by looking at last week this one historical document. Went too fast. That's the Cyrus cylinder, which is a piece of historical record. And the artifact in the middle, this is the Cyrus cylinder, which records, from a historical standpoint, the same information we're talking about right now. And so that's an important point. It's in the British Museum. So there is archaeological confirmation of who Cyrus was. This is his, this is where he was buried. You can still, if you're visiting some of the ruins, you can go there and see this, that's his tomb. Of Cyrus is there. You can, so Cyrus is a documented person of history. And then we looked at and we called attention in the book of Isaiah, the latter part of chapter 44 and the first part of chapter 45 last week. How many hundreds of years was there that Isaiah spoke about the coming of Cyrus? 200 years before he was ever born. So the point here is that God's prophetic words are an important tool showing the credibility, showing the reliability of the Word of God. And so all of that is important. We talked about the fact that God is working, and he is working, and the way God is bringing these things about is called what? Providence. He's doing this providentially. Now, just because God doesn't have to tell us exactly how he is going to bring it about. He lets us know, though, he's doing it. And he gives us some keys as to when it's going to occur. Sometimes God in the Old Testament, he would move miraculously, and then sometimes God moves naturally. He sometimes he's independent of secondary means or secondary causes. Sometimes he moves directly, and that's supernatural. But God oftentimes, and he continues even today, to work in the providential manner. And so, in essence, God is working things. That's why we had this, nope, no, I want to go back here. Where did I do it? Okay, yep, right there. God is working to bring about his means, his plan, and he will do it in accordance to his will. And so, all right, I didn't need talking about some of that. We've already looked at a lot of that stuff in the past. All right, so tonight we're going to look a little bit further at Cyrus, and going to look a little bit deeper into what God has said about this man. And we're going to go to the book of Jeremiah tonight and start in the book of Jeremiah and observe that God would use Cyrus to punish the king of Babylon, who, by the way, was the man that God raised up to punish his people. And the Babylonians thought that this was their empire, by the way. So this map right here, I want to show you. The Assyrian kingdom was this, and then as you can see, the Babylonian empire is that kind of shaded part. And it's important, I want you to see right here, Babylonia, city of Babylon, the Euphrates River is going to run right through the city of Babylon, and that's going to be important, especially as we read some passages. You get a kind of a mental picture or visual picture about Babylon. I'll keep that map up there for a moment. The question comes, how did God bring about the overthrow of this empire of Babylon through Cyrus, the Persian king? And keep this in mind. You remember this image? Remember this chart? Daniel will talk about when Nebuchadnezzar was on the throne. He had a dream, and Daniel was inspired to give him the interpretation of the dream, and the 4 worldwide kingdoms. So the head of gold was the Babylonian, the arms and chest, the Medo-Persian, and then the bronze, the Greek, and then the legs and feet of clay, part iron, part clay, the Roman Empire. And he pointed out, this is the dream. Here's the interpretation of the dream. And he said, you, O king, you are this head of gold, but there's going to come a kingdom after you, and it's going to take over. Well, we'll come back to this in a few moments. But I think is anyone in here not familiar with Daniel's dream, the interpretation of the dream. We'll come back to this. I know I went through this really fast, but if you're not, just say, I'm not familiar with that. I know you didn't raise your hand back there. I know what I said, and I thought she was just playing with me. All right. Without go, okay. I don't want to. Just real quick, because we'll get to this. When Daniel was in captivity, God sent a dream to Nebuchadnezzar, and this prophesied the coming of the kingdom or of the church. And the long story, the quick narrative of this is an important component because it emphasizes here's God's plan to bring the church. And as our chart indicates on the bottom, the New Testament reveals that Jesus and John the Baptist preached the establishment of God's kingdom by saying it was at hand. Matthew 3, verse 2, Matthew 4, 17, and 23. Since the church and the kingdom are one and the same, Matthew 16, verse 19, Mark 9, 1, and others, the church was established in the first century during the days of the Roman Empire, the days of these kings. God established the church in the days of the Roman kings. The Roman Empire, partly strong, partly weak. Each of these worldwide empires God used to defeat the other, and God, when the time was right, Galatians chapter 4, verse 4, sent forth his son born under the law, born of a woman, so that he could provide redemption for his people. He didn't send Jesus during the Persian Empire. He didn't send him during the Greek Empire, but he sent him at the right time under the Roman Empire. And this was, and because we're going to be talking about this later in more depth, the fulfillment, this image, Daniel predicted the coming of God's kingdom, one that would never be destroyed, not made with hands. So we'll come back. We're going to come back to that a number of times. So let's begin and talk about some things in Jeremiah. So we'll call your attention to some things in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 50 and 51 deal with the overthrow of the Babylonian Empire. Giving you a couple of observations here. One writer called it the oracle against Babylon, Jeremiah 50, verse 1 through 51:64. Although Jeremiah advocated submission to Babylon, remember, prophet Jeremiah told the Israelites, look, we're going to Babylon, behave yourself, just unlike things today. He said, look, don't go in there, no, don't be protesting, just go. God is sending us, and just go be obedient. As the world power appointed by God, he was no Babylonian partisan. So even though Jeremiah said, be obedient, do what you're told, he was not an apostle for the Babylonians. But he was God's man because he understood this is God's will. God is using Babylon to punish us, so let's take our punishment. He regarded Nebuchadnezzar, he knew Nebuchadnezzar was only a tool which God was using to accomplish his purpose. Justice demanded that the Babylonians therefore taste the wrath of God. So God is using this nation to punish the Jews. But Nebuchadnezzar is going to also have to be punished because of and Babylon for their disobedience. An outline of these two chapters can be as follows. If you want to write that down, write it somewhere, it might be good for you. The defeat of Babylon, verses 1 through 34 of chapter 34. The destruction of Babylon, beginning at verse 35 through chapter 51, verse 26. And then picking up at verse 27, the doom of Babylon through verse 58. And then the small section at the end of chapter 51, the history of the Babylon oracle. And so Jeremiah closes that section with just a little bit of historical statement for the record. So let's go to chapter 50 and verse number 17. Israel is like scattered sheep. The lions have driven him away. First, the king of Assyria devoured him. Now at last, this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has broken his bones. And so Jeremiah, we know exactly to whom he's talking about. A couple things. Assyria and Babylon, like two mighty lions, have devoured Israel. Assyria had already fallen. So remember, Assyria had, what role did Assyria play? Assyria captured the north. God brought Assyria against the northern kingdom. Babylon would soon fall just like the Assyrians fell. So the Assyrians fell to what kingdom? Babylonia, the head of gold. But Babylon would soon fall in like manner. Then the scattered sheep of Israel would return to graze in the pasture of the land of Canaan. And that when he's talking about both children from the north as well as from the south. God would grant to the remnant, and we talked about that before, the remnant, not everyone, but the remnant part of the entire nation, pardon for sins committed against him. Verses 17 through 20. Brother Wade Webster and a number of you, if you were down at Bowling Green and Lehman Abbott, had a chance to listen to Brother Webster. Wade Webster, in the annual Denton Lecture commentaries on Jeremiah, had some wonderful observations, and I just wanted to include what Wade had to say regarding these verses. Verse 17, Israel is a scattered sheep. Again, God uses the common image of sheep to portray his people. It should be noted that sin scatters. It separated Israel from Jehovah, from their homeland, and from one another. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2. As Brother Jackson points out, the record here concerning the conquest of the king of Assyria and then Nebuchadnezzar, who is the Babylonian king, we know these things from a historical perspective. The northern kingdom went away in 721 BC, and then we've already observed that the south or the southern kingdom would fall, and it did. How many deportations were there? 3. 3 waves of taking the Jews out of the south and over into Babylon. All right. Then in verse 18, therefore thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. And you need to keep in mind, so we know Jeremiah is telling the people who it is who's doing this. Behold, I, circle the I, and the antecedent of that is whom? It's God. I will punish the king of Babylon and his land as I have punished the king of Assyria. Again, Brother Webster notes out, the lions have driven, I'm sorry, I didn't get to verse 18 yet. Brother Webster, back on verse 17 again, said Babylon and Assyria are clearly identified as the lions that have scattered and devoured Israel. And that's correct. In verse 17, the lions refer to the kingdom of Assyria and the kingdom of Babylon. It is interesting, if you'll note, if you look at images in the ruins of those nations, as we have unearthed through archaeology, and you've observed their paintings, they depict themselves and their people as lions, especially lions with wings. The Babylonians loved to do that. That's how they saw themselves. Interesting. And so Isaiah uses some of this, and so the lions that have scattered and devoured Israel were these 2 nations. Assyria came first, then Babylon. Assyria devoured the flesh and Babylon broke the bones. Assyria carried away the northern tribes 10, and Babylon the rest 2. Please note that Nebuchadnezzar is specifically identified, Brother Webster says, in verse 17 as the king of Babylon. Now, verse 18. I think I got a comment on verse 18. Yes, I do. All right, I do. So when we look at verse 18, here again, therefore thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. Again, Wade says we have a reference to inspiration. Jehovah wasn't speaking from the recesses of his heart, but from the revelation, or rather Jeremiah wasn't speaking from the recesses of his heart, but from the revelation of God. It wasn't his will being expressed, but God's. God promised to punish Babylon as he had done Assyria. Sorry about that typo. Assyria's punishment became the surety for I know that dash wasn't supposed to be in there. There was, and Microsoft, I didn't catch that correction. Yeah, so, yeah. But anyway, so, then in verse 19, again, God goes on and he says, but I will bring back Israel to his habitation, and he shall feed on Carmel and Bashan. His soul shall be satisfied on Mount Ephraim and Gilead. And so here is Jeremiah saying that in a specific prophecy, what God is going to do. He is going to bring back the remnant from both the north and from the south. They are going to return to the land, and they are going to be blessed by God. 3 important points that he brings out here. Number 1, who's going to bring this about? Jehovah. God is the one who is going to do this. I will do this. We've said a number of times, and we keep mentioning this, it is God who reigns. It is God who rules in the kingdoms of men, Daniel 2:21. And not only does God rule and reign in the kingdoms of men, but according to Daniel 4:17, what else does he do? He gives the kingdoms of men to whomever he chooses. God is the one who is, and so many times we fail to remember this point, that it's God is ultimately in control. And, we think, well, we're going to do this. And if we get enough people to vote this way or that way, guess what? If God says, I don't care, every person in America votes a certain way, this is what I'm going to do. Do you think we're going to sway? We're going to have our way? No. It is the Jews they tried to get ahead of God on a number of occasions. A number of kings tried to do things to God, and God said, look, I told you this is what's going to happen. You can try to make a number of the kings tried to make treaties with other nations, and God said, you might as well don't do that. Even in the South, when they tried to make a treaty with Egypt, and God told the prophet, tell them don't do that. Josiah made a mistake. Josiah started doing some great work, and we consider Josiah a great king, don't we? Yet Josiah made a very serious error. He tried to negotiate a treaty with the Pharaoh of Egypt, and God said, no. Well, he died. He was told, don't do that. You started off the right way, putting your trust in me. You don't need to make any treaties with foreign nations. So God is the one who says that he is going to take Nebuchadnezzar off the throne, and he will be succeeded by someone else. I'm going to go back. Oops. Oh, no, not that way, Richard. Don't do that right now. You remember when Nebuchadnezzar was on the throne, Daniel is and Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they're in captivity in Babylon. He has the dream, and Daniel says, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. What does it mean? God gives him he gives him both the dream and the interpretation of the dream, and he tells him, he says, you, O king, are that head of gold. And there's another kingdom coming up behind you. And God has he said, look, I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. And so you will know that it's going to happen until you come to accept that what God has said is true. He says, you're going to be out in the field. You're going to be outside the kingdom, outside the walls, eating grass like an animal. Your fingernails are going to grow long until you come to know that God rules in the kingdoms of men. Then you're going to be allowed to come back inside the kingdom. And that indeed happened. And once that's transpired, Nebuchadnezzar made the observation, now I know, he said, that it is God who rules in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Not me. He said, I know now. I had to learn the hard lesson. The second point, it's only a question about number one. It's God who's going to bring this about. Number two, then, who is God going to use to punish Nebuchadnezzar? Cyrus, the king of Persia. Cyrus, the king of Persia, is going to be the instrument that God is going to use. God is the one who will raise up Cyrus. Remember, we learned last week as we read both from Josephus and other writings that God had, when Cyrus heard that his name had been spoken of 200 years earlier, Cyrus was so impressed that the God of Israel knew who he was before he was even born, knew who he would be. Cyrus said, "Oh yeah, you guys, okay, everybody, man, y'all go." He identified me. Now Cyrus, of course, Cyrus was a little arrogant, but God raised him up for a purpose. And then third, what would God have Cyrus to do? He would overthrow Nebuchadnezzar. He would issue an edict that the Israelite people would go back home. Now, Brother Jackson talked about, to appreciate this, this is a rendition of what Babylon looked like during the time of, at the height of the Babylonian Empire. When Nebuchadnezzar was there, he says, Babylon was situated about 50 miles due south of the modern city of Baghdad. Nebuchadnezzar. Babylon, yeah, to the height and the glory of that world empire. That we were already found. So, I wonder if that's why he decided that he thought that he needed to build his underground spider web, because, they had a vast underground aqueduct system, but it wasn't for that reason. It was for water. But Babylon, if you study Old Testament history, is called the Golden Empire. As we said, you think about Daniel chapter 2. Where's my, oops, went the wrong way. Michael, can you get me back? I pressed that button. I need to get back to my Daniel 2 slide. Yeah. Can you just take me right to that Daniel 2 slide, please? The image of if you can, just put me right there. If not, I'll do it. All right, I'll do it the wrong way. I keep forgetting that down is up and up is down. Just about to the image. Here we go. Okay. So, Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed a dream of great things and had a head of gold, breast of silver, belly and thighs of brass, and legs iron, partly of clay. So that head of gold was Nebuchadnezzar. The Babylonian Empire is still considered the golden empire of antiquity. Everything, and it's interesting, they just overlaid things with gold. As we keep unearthing things, that was what they just loved to do. According to the Greek historian Herodotus and Xenophon, another writer, Diodorus, these all contributed to this picture of the Babylonian Empire. getting back to this image right here, because it is interesting. It is said that the city of Babylon was laid out in a perfect square, 15 miles long on each side. So you take 15 by 15 by 15 by 15, that's pretty sizable, especially when you're talking about 15 miles by 15 miles by 15 miles. That's pretty sizable in any time frame, but you think about back then, they built a huge city. And one of the great things about Babylon was the fact that the Euphrates River ran right through the center of the city. When we get to the next, we won't be able to get to it today, but that's important because that will be how Cyrus will affect his entry into the city. The Babylonians had built a fantastic aqueduct system, and so they were able to get water to the city. And not only that, but now think about this: the city was built such a way that they say that their walls were 300 feet high and 75 feet thick. Now, that's big. That's huge. And they became so arrogant, no one's going to ever enter our city. We got them. They can't get in. Yeah, you can look at it as a citadel. That's more Mediterranean, but the same thing. Yeah, I mean, yeah. They felt that they conquered the Assyrians, and they figured out. They said, "Well, that we know what their weakness was, so we're not going to let that. That's not going to happen." Nebuchadnezzar said, "That's not going to happen to us." And so, well, yeah. You know, the problem is he doesn't realize who he's fighting against. He's not fighting against man. He's really fighting against God. Now, the interesting thing, in that region of the world, they knew they had to have one thing to withstand a siege. And what's that? What's one of the one things you got to have? Water. So with the river coming right through the city, they banked water through their aqueduct system. They said, "Oh, guess what? We don't care whatever army's out there. We can outlast them because the water is in the city. We control the water." So you thought. Under normal circumstances, yes, you do control the water. But you're not fighting against. You're fighting against God. All right, so we have to stop there. If you've read ahead in the book of Isaiah, you'll know the plan that God allowed Cyrus to use, masterpiece of strategy to defeat Nebuchadnezzar. And this is what God always does when we become prideful and we believe let's look how great, how smart I am. Yes. And God humbles us very quickly because we think we're so great. And the next king we get to will say that we'll do the same thing. Alexander the Great, the young general who marches through, and I am just so great. I can't be defeated. And God says, yeah. They built, and they thought, we can't be destroyed. No one's going to come in and harm us. Yeah, but he failed to remember what God had told him. He had forgotten. Now, it may, Nebuchadnezzar does die, and his son doesn't remember, doesn't take into context. Here's what God has said is going to happen. All right, let's stop there.